Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A policy is only as good as its implementation and thrives with collective action and multi-stakeholder agency. Business leaders have a deep responsibility to protect those who are most vulnerable. I'm joined by 4 influential business leaders from 4 jurisdictions, representing a plethora of disciplines to share their perspectives on what action business leaders need to take to raise awareness and address modern slavery risks. Let me briefly reintroduce our panelists. Dr. Andrew Forrest, Executive Chairman and founder of Fortescue. We're joined by Monty Simus, Vice President of the Bayat Foundation. We are also joined by Mr. Pak Dharma Digionegera, CEO of Adaro Power Indonesia, and Mr. Chevaan Daniel, Group Director, Capital Maharaja Group. I'll start off with Dr. Forrest. Modern slavery exists because it's profitable. What impetus is there for businesses to prioritize ending modern slavery, given that every region in the world and every economy is implicated, given that there is a tension between corporate responsibility and profit maximization?
Look, I think you refer to the kind of two-hat syndrome where people sometimes say, which hat do we wear, the humanitarian hat or the business hat? I have to say there's no such thing. There's one hat. If you do not have a humanitarian aspect to everything you do in business, then really you're not running a sustainable business. And the risk of modern slavery being found in your supply chains is becoming incredibly serious. And I would say to all business leaders, and I thank very much Mrs. Bayat and the Major General Intelligence who I just spoke to, who was quite open, quite humble to say that their technology is not yet keeping pace with the technology of the slavers, with the technology of those who profit from modern slavery. And I really appreciated that, because for all businesses out there who are about to give themselves glowing reports, 100 out of 100 for having no slavery in their supply chains, may I just promise you this, you haven't looked. If you do look, you're going to find slavery in your supply chains. And instead of projecting a profile where you believe that others want to hear that you've had a glance at your supply chains, no slavery there, great, mark your own homework, give yourself a high score. I'd simply say this: there is slavery everywhere. The only thing I could ask Mrs. Bayat to do is not to seek for an improvement in the conditions of slavery in her country, but to seek an end to slavery in her country. I appreciated her saying it's been lasting thousands of years, and that's because she's telling the truth. Slavery is one of the most exploitive, horrible, and oldest businesses in the world. It breeds just off the part of human nature which we're not proud of, that's extreme selfishness. And I really, really ask business leaders everywhere to acknowledge you'll have slavery in your supply chains. It's just a matter of whether or not you've looked hard enough to find it. I know at Fortescue, we kind of took pride that we were leading Australia, and we might have got a bit smug, fat and happy. And when slavery was discovered in our 3rd and 4th, 5th order supply chains, in our renewable energy in terms of solar panels, it was slapped all over the media. It was front page, back page of all the great publications, because we were forward-leaning as a company. But we took ourselves too literally. We got proud of our stance, and we slipped badly. And when I was asked if I was ashamed about all the headlines, I said, no, I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful that if Fortescue, which leans right forward and hard on modern slavery, is found to have slavery in its supply chains. Let it be a warning to all companies that if Fortescue has slipped up, then I assure you, so will you. You're just not looking hard enough. We have slavery in our supply chains, and I would ask every single business owner to not tolerate those who might mark their own homework, to not accept as chairman or chief executive that you've done a great job. No, continue searching for it. Only that will eliminate slavery from your supply chains. Continuous search.
All right, thank you very much. Holding oneself to account. Monty, you're representing Dr. Bayat today during the panel discussion. Your organization is extensively involved in philanthropy. What innovative approaches do you believe are crucial in tackling the root causes of modern slavery? And how important is it to hold yourselves to account as business organizations?
Sure, thank you very much, Sunil. In terms of innovation, as Mrs. Bayat explained, we find ourselves in a very complex situation in country. So it's hard to deliver messages perhaps in what would be the typical manner. Like we hosted the events in 2019, it was very successful. Transition in August 2021 makes a similar event a little bit complex. So we turn to our sister companies, our telecommunications, media companies, and we use them to what we call ICE, information, communication, education. We insert the messages, whether it's through narratives in radio and television dramas. We use advantages of SMS messaging, which can reach 5 million of the 40 million citizens of Afghanistan. So we use technology in what we think are creative, innovative ways that are seen by current officials as perhaps more benign than if we were just leading with a big event and conference. The second part of your question, which is why is it so important for us, I think, is I've slightly forgotten the exact question, but it's a little bit about
accountability.
Accountability is, the Bayat Group is one of the largest and most established organizations in the country. I mean, arguably the 6,000 plus employees in all 34 provinces. So we have to lead for where others won't step up. And that's why we published the Modern Slavery Statement, the first one in the country. We just try to lead so that hopefully others will follow. And if they don't follow immediately, I mean, the vision of the Bayat family has always been we're there for the long run. And so we will continue and persist, and hopefully people will follow eventually.
Thank you. Dharma, your efforts in combating modern slavery have the guidance of Mr. Thohir, who is in our audience. As a leader in the Indonesian energy industry, how has Adaro Energy leveraged its influence and resources to address instances of modern slavery? Speak to us also about how you drive advocacy efforts aimed at eradicating this issue across the sector.
Okay, so I think, first of all, right, so Pak Boy, so when you say Pak Garibaldi, we also, Pak Boy is also interchangeable, so if I say Pak Boy, I mean Pak Garibaldi. So we did the Bali Tech Forum, as Pak Boy mentioned in his speech earlier, and I think it actually, I was listening to the previous panel, and actually a lot of the similar themes are raised, right? So the previous panel talked about telcos, for example. In Narut Bali Tech Forum, we had the chairman and the director of operations of one of Indonesia's largest telco talk about the same problems, right? Which is, how do we stop the online scams and such. So I think the Bali Tech Forum showed us that technology can play a pivotal role, right, in helping prevent this. And also in Adaro, we have a set of procedures on our supply chain. Just a simple anecdotal example is we're building a wind plant, a wind power farm, and our supplier selection actually is we're very cognizant and very, very conscious of avoiding names that might be linked with human trafficking and so forth. So it's got conscious practice on our part. So again, technology can play a pivotal role, right? I think we need to embrace the technology side of it, both on raising awareness and on prevention. But I also want to point another thing, which is, and I'll start with a little bit of a story. So 2 years ago, when I started this journey with the Bali Process, we went to Adelaide, right? And I'll come back to the theme, but I'm not by any means a celebrity, but I have like 200,000 Instagram followers, so I posted, I'm in Adelaide, Bali Process, right? And the first 10 texts I received was like, oh, are you in Bali? Let's meet up, right? So, which goes to show that people don't understand and are not aware of the Bali Process and what it's about. So the story is just there to illustrate that, raising awareness is still a very, very key part of what we must do. And again, in Bali Tech Forum, one of the things we did, we invited one of Indonesia's actual celebrity, right? She has 9 million followers, so she posted it and instantly got 200,000 likes, right? But it's not only social media, we also invited traditional media, right? We invited the chief editors of Indonesia's largest media companies, and obviously made the news, right? Again, raised awareness both in the traditional media and social media. So I actually love that we're doing this in a TV studio, which is sort of fits the theme. Right.
Fantastic.
And thanks to Chevaan for the
Chevaan, Sri Lanka has a robust legal framework to tackle contemporary forms of slavery, but also so many avenues where labor can be exploitative. You've been working closely with Dr. Forrest on the Bali Process for almost a decade. From a Sri Lankan business perspective, what have been some of your observations on what more needs to be done?
Thank you, Sonali, and it's a huge honor to be on this panel with all of these amazing panelists. I think CMG has a history, a culture of, I think what my chairman put it best when he said it's the top line, the bottom line, and the heart line. So the top line and the bottom line, we're all professionals, we know how to manage it, but the heart line needs to be healthy. And that's something that we're really invested in. And one of the things that we do really well, I think, and that we are really committed to as a group is listen to the people. We spend an awful lot of time deeply connected to the people of Sri Lanka. We're not a very large country, obviously. We're 21 million people, but sometimes I think we're as complicated as if it was 210 million people, because we're a little island nation of 30,000 villages. And almost every single one of those villages is a microcosm of its own culture, tradition, things like that. So it's very complicated. And you need to really understand this country. You need to take time and listen to what's going on. Because it's a country with a very deep history and civilization, a civilization that dates back 5,000 to 6,000 years. So it's not easy to understand what goes on in Sri Lanka all the time. So you need to really have your ear to the rail, as it were. So over the past, I would think just over a decade, we've been working particularly with rural Sri Lanka on the Gammadha movement that was a natural progression from the humanitarian work the organization was involved in for many decades. We went to the village just because we wanted to respond to things like natural disasters, etc. And we began to understand that there was a massive contrast between what you see in Colombo and what you might see in the rest of the country. That dichotomy led us to want to do something. And we didn't have a grand plan. It wasn't as though we had this vision of what Gammadha has become today. But we just began with some sort of action. We began with listening to the people, walking from home to home, talking to people and listening to what they had to say. And what we heard back was this divide between the human development indices of the high literacy rate, the high per capita GDP, etc., and how much people were struggling and how badly they were looking for opportunity and the sacrifices people were having to make to just educate their children, for example. So when we go into, as I said earlier, Sri Lanka's village system is very strong and it's founded on the family. So the Sri Lankan family is a very important part of our culture. But when you take a father or a mother out of that family, or a son or a daughter, it destroys the family. And when you destroy that fabric of society, it eventually erodes into the entire nation, and that's what's happened today. So we need to get back to basics, Sonali. We need to go back and strengthen the family. Maybe the family, the dynamic of what a family looks like has changed. It's 2024, and we're fine with that, but we need to strengthen the smallest common denominator so that we stay true to what Sri Lanka has been over hundreds and thousands of years and held this nation together as a very strong, vibrant civilization in the center of the world. So that's our focus, strengthening the Sri Lankan family, making sure they have the support, the protection they need, and it's a huge honor to have these commanders on our side in that fight.
Beautiful. Dr. Forrest, when we speak about the importance of protecting the most vulnerable, there seems to be a bit of dissonance across the world because we have the powerful stakeholders like business, government, civil society, who at times are wrapped up in their own worlds with their own vested self-interests. And on the other end, we have the disempowered citizenry that is perhaps economically helpless, with limited knowledge, a lack of awareness of their rights. How do we bridge this gap in a meaningful and coherent manner?
It's just an excellent question, thank you. It's how to unpack it. For a start, it's economic. We as nations and as businesses need to recognize that the vulnerability starts with economics. That if you are impoverished, if you haven't had what Chevaan's chairman spoke most eloquently to his mentoring about, which is opportunity, then you're probably going to fall prey to what looks like an opportunity, which is, in fact, slavery. So I think let's start with the fact that when you have COVID, when you have climate change, when you have conflict, you have threat multipliers. And the major reason why those threats multiply in order to drive slavery up as opposed to down is because business leaders and political leaders like us get, as you say, wrapped up in our own challenges, our own issues of the day. And I'd say, you need, as leaders, to only occupy that chair of leadership if you can walk and chew gum. I'm completely intolerant of people who say to me, there's a war in Gaza or there's a war in Ukraine, and therefore I can't do this or I can't do that. That is just absolute selfish laziness. When you are aware that there's vulnerability in your supply chains, or if you're not, it's because you haven't looked, then you are abdicating your responsibility of leadership. You are just taking up space where someone else could do a much better job. So I think, first of all, if you're a leader, accept your responsibility that you've got to search for slavery in your supply chains. If you're in business and in politics, accept your responsibility that you can protect the environment, you can drive economic growth, and you can drive out the conditions of poverty, of economic impairment, which drives up the prevalence of slavery. And so I do think that it's about leadership. I think, and I encourage everyone in the room and everyone who is more broadly an audience here, that if you occupy a position of power, then you must drive economic advantage into your community and you must drive out the aspects of vulnerability and start with yourself. Start with your own supply chain, start with your own company, and then spread the message, as my friend from Bayat just said, spread the message by your example, but also by your advocacy, by being at places like this, responding to the leadership of Chevaan Daniel, the chairman of this wonderful group, and get out there and advocate for the least fortunate.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest. Dharma, I'd like to come to you. You spoke earlier about how imperative it is to recognize the power of media, digital technology platforms in raising awareness about human trafficking, modern slavery. Dharma, technology can be both a driver of and a potential solution to modern slavery. But increasingly, we're seeing how technology is being exploited and how the victims are increasingly not those who are illiterate or don't have any digital literacy. It's quite the opposite. So how do we bridge this gap?
So I think technology is a tool, right? So again, I think we need to acknowledge that, both from the Bali Tech Forum, previous panels and all that, right? Technology is a tool, right? If you don't use it, the other side will use it, right, so to speak, and then you lose half the battle already. So I think we need to, in terms of fighting against this, you need to have the level playing field, if you will, by having technology on your side as well. But I agree with you that it's not enough, right? I think in the end, we believe that the root cause also needs to be addressed, right? Which is, again, opportunity, as Dr. Andrew Forrest mentioned, Mrs. Bayat also mentioned economic developments, right? So I think the root cause of it in each of our respective countries, in each of our respective businesses and communities and networks, we need to spend effort, right, and continually develop the economic opportunities, right? If the opportunities are there, no matter the technology, right, people won't go, right? The other point I also want to point out is, I think as businesses, and it's very heartening to see a lot of leaders here, we need to show the way, right? We need to sort of lead the way, but we can't do it ourselves either, right? So I think we need to work closely with governments, we need to work closely with NGOs, right? Foundations, etc., to make sure that, again, right, the supporting regulation is there, the awareness is there, right? Just because people receive an online scam, if they know something about it, then they might not click the link, or they might not go deeper down the rabbit hole, right? So I think it's hard to have I don't think there's a silver bullet in this instance, but I think it's a series of work streams, if you will, that we all have to pursue.
Thank you. Monty, when I was doing my research before the panel, I read that the Bayat Group issued Afghanistan's first modern slavery statement back in 2018. And Dr. Bayat had said, and I quote, "Modern slavery is a hidden crime that affects every country. It permeates all economic sectors, and no country or industry is immune." Speak to us about how it was to host a government and business forum in Afghanistan, specifically with respect to ending the child labor campaign, because I think jurisdictionally, we have a lot to learn from each other.
Thank you for the question. So first off, building on the Global Slavery Index, Afghanistan is a country that has, on any given day, more than 500,000 people in modern slavery, like every given day. So we viewed this as a problem which absolutely needs to be addressed in some respect and in immediacy. So as my fellow panelists have mentioned, we've thought a lot about economic empowerment. We thought a lot about education. We've approached all these different angles to try to address this. But the prevalence of particularly children that are impacted by modern slavery in Afghanistan is significant. It tracks back to economic fragility. It tracks back to some cultural traditions which have been in place for hundreds, thousands of years, and it also tracks back to how the country is a little bit disaggregated in terms of small communities and places that aren't always easily accessed either through information or other lines of communication. So we targeted a lot about children because they're the future of the country, and Afghanistan also has a very big youth demographic. The current circumstances prevent some parts of or place restrictions on some parts of the population, which is challenging. But as Mrs. Bayat noted, engagement, both within and from without, is incredibly important for us. And so the lessons that, Afghanistan is, as Mrs. Bayat said, like, it's a place that is easily, tucked in the back of people's minds or pushed off the radar for various reasons. So we're just hopeful that that's not the case. And if there's anything that we can share with others in terms of just our commitment to particularly addressing the youth, whether that's through technology or whether it's just making small changes in education, giving them the chance to go to school, it's something that we'd hope to share with Sri Lanka and others. And this is one reason why over the years that we've been privileged to be part of the Bali Process. We've had a great affinity with Chevaan and his team because Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, they're different, but they're both small countries, and we both have a perhaps outsized modern slavery problem.
All right, thank you. Chevaan, the intersection between cricket, media, and combating modern slavery. Speak to us about the recent media campaign during the Cricket World Cup.
Well, a quick clarification first. Before I personally become a victim of modern-day slavery, Dr. Forrest, my amazing chairman, is seated over there, Sashi Rajamahendran, and he's an incredible leader to have. So I'm group director, he's the chairman. The cricket, I wish I could be happier to speak about it right now, because obviously Sri Lanka isn't doing too well. We've been eliminated out of the World Cup, the T20 World Cup. But it's interesting because there are two things that unite Sri Lanka, and that's cricket and music. And quite recently, we've signed up with the International Cricket Council, the ICC, for a period of 2 years. And that includes 6 global tournaments. It's quite a phenomenal historic agreement with the ICC. We've also signed up with Virgin Music to take Sri Lankan music to the world, because Sri Lanka has an incredible heritage of music. So these two areas that unite Sri Lanka is across divides of race and religion are very important to us. The work we've been doing with the Bali Process obviously is equally important to us. And so when the opportunity presented itself to unite the Bali Process with cricket, we thought, why not? And I'd love to mention the leadership shown by Serena Grant and Catherine and the rest of the team from Walk Free, who worked really hard to get us a beautiful, impactful commercial in time for the last 50 over World Cup. And I remember speaking to the chairman at the time and saying, in media parlance, to us, airtime is I and O, in a sense. Every 5 seconds means money, okay? And to commit to airtime, some people don't understand what 30 seconds means. All of this is upkept with the seconds that we sell. And so committing airtime wasn't an easy decision, but I spoke to Chairman Sashi, and he took all of 5 seconds to say, let's do it. And that was a license to me to say, okay, let's really put our money where our mouth is and run this commercial during the 50 over World Cup, and we did. And the impact over here in Sri Lanka was like, what's that? And we thought that was really interesting, the response we got, because it got plenty of airtime right across the tournament. And we also then decided to run it during the current T20 World Cup as well, just to create more awareness, as Dharma said. The more awareness that is created, I think the easier it is our fight will become eventually. And so that is kind of the story behind the unity between cricket, the World Cup, Bali Process, and our media network over here. And I think it's a wonderful, beautiful story that we can tell at all conferences and summits in the future as well.
Fabulous. We have about 9 more minutes on the clock. I'd like to come to you for our closing remarks. Monty, let me start off with you. How must we infuse a sense of agency in those who are survivors of modern slavery, those who are susceptible to modern slavery. It is all well and good for business leaders, for INGOs, for governments to drive combating modern slavery. But it is also important for the citizenry to have agency.
Yes, no, excellent question, and an important sort of part of the strategy. I think, as Mrs. Bayat said, there's a lot of bad news which can be said, but the real heroes in some of the great stories are the survivors and those that have, transitioned from becoming a victim to being a survivor. Before the transition in 2021, we were able to tell those stories quite easily and openly and frequently. In the current situation, that's a little harder for us to do that, but we don't give up. We find that these stories are being told at maybe less public fora, so at a community level or at a level of a village, et cetera. And we have to champion that, and we have to sort of encourage those stories to be told as actively as we did prior in a very public setting. We're just doing it in a slightly different context. So again, those are the real sort of, you want more of those stories, you want more of those sort of wonderful successes. So that's how we're sort of navigating that situation at the moment.
Thank you. Dharma, how best can we leverage tech in combating modern slavery? Specifically, given that perhaps those who are most marginalized don't have access to technology?
To be honest, I don't know the answer. I think that's part of our struggle, which is we need to keep on the dialogue, keep on the discussion to find the answer. I think telco is obviously a key component. Again, somebody I think mentioned, previous panelists, that everybody now has a cell phone, right? So that's an obvious explanation. But I think, again, to me, closing statement with 5 minutes left, right? Which is, I think, to me, there's no silver bullet. I think we have to do all the above, right? Economic empowerment, raising awareness, involving tech, right? Working together and all that. And I think we need to, again, continue to work together, both within businesses, within countries, and also with governments and NGOs. And I think, it's an ongoing fight, and we have to keep on at it.
Media has a massive platform to communicate messages to the people at large. What is the role of CMG in this?
Well, I think media has now broken through that glass ceiling of simply being limited to a screen. Media has to be now almost activist. We have to be deeply involved in the communities that we're working with, and as Dr. Forrest quite rightly said, it's all about leadership. So we see ourselves with a responsibility that goes way beyond simply providing news and entertainment, but breaking through that barrier that perhaps kept us away from things that, for example, the government is supposed to do. We don't see it that way anymore. We just see our role far more amorphous than it used to be. We see our role in connecting with communities to be deeper, more responsible. And so wherever that takes us, we are willing to go. We're not encumbered by the peripheries of the past.
Thank you, Chevaan. Dr. Forrest, businesses are such a powerful stakeholder in any economy. How must businesses collectively leverage this power to compel errant governments, negligent governments, to act expeditiously?
Chairman, Executive Director, all I can say is that you've got a very well-informed interlocutor here. And so, look, thank you for the question. Errant governments, That's a great word. And I really want to deeply thank the governments which are here from Australia. The fact that Afghanistan is on the back foot, as has been acknowledged, but your group is here leaning forward. Indonesia, just thank you for the leadership, and of course Sri Lanka. I mean, a small country really punching above its own weight because it understands that slavery is just a scourge of humanity. I think businesses recognise that it's easy to look the other way, and I just say so strongly to business leaders, you do that, you define your own character and you define the legacy of your leadership, that you really shouldn't have a legacy at all. And I'd say really firmly that businesses can hold governments to account. You are their paymasters, they exist on your taxes. And therefore, if you don't ask for standards to be held to, then don't be surprised that they don't. You get the leaders that you deserve. You get the leaders that you demand. And so I say to all business leaders here, please strongly support your governments to lean forward into modern slavery. You look at where modern slavery goes, and it perpetrates a perpetuity, a permanence of evil in society. If we can cut that off, if we can limit to extinguish slavery in the world, then I can assure you of a much better world, because those people who may turn to drugs, may turn to alcohol, may turn to terrorism, may turn to crime, are often those people who have seen it and suffered it first. And so I'd say very strongly, business, strong message to business. There's a serious risk if you export products around the world, say like anywhere into Europe, with the Corporate Responsibility Directive, which our own organisation pushed very hard to bring into Europe, then it will have a very substantial impact if that means that you're suddenly barred from doing business in Europe because you didn't bother to look hard at your supply chains. It will also have a very substantial impact on what the good chairman here, I've spoke about the top, bottom and hard line. Yes, you've got to look after your top and bottom, but if you business do not look after your hard line, do not look after the humanity in your supply chains, then expect to be called out. It will just be a matter of time. And I really want to thank you for putting the responsibility onto business to hold our governments to account. We must do that, and similarly, governments, you have a responsibility to hold us to account. So I really want to thank the Government and Business Forum for pulling us together.
Fantastic. Dr. Andrew Forrest, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that draws to a close this fabulous panel discussion. 4 influential business leaders, 4 countries, 4 areas of business on a single platform with the common objective of combating modern slavery in a bid to transform lives. Gentlemen, thank you.